Lovely. Oh, well, welcome everybody. And it's my great pleasure tonight to talk to Anna Miles about three of the artists in her gallery. And we're going to start off tonight talking about Octavia Cook, who's always fascinated me. And I wondered, Anna, Octavia's got a great sense of humour. And I wondered if you'd like to start off just by telling us a little bit of background about how she set up her fictitious company.
Yes, it's very interesting. She graduated from Unitec, having done a 4-year jewellery degree in 1999. And by 2003, she had invented her fabricated company, Cook & Co. And I suppose it was really founded in her allergy to the corporate jewellery trade. So I suppose it was a bit of a parody of the Tiffany & Co's of this world. And it was also based on her, what she said was a very plain surname that had very interesting local resonance. Yeah.
Absolutely, absolutely. And it has always interested me, the importance of the cameo to her, the use of the cameo, because of course historically cameos have a whole lot of resonances to do with commemoration and recording people you may have lost or people who are traveling. You know, when you think of people coming to New Zealand, often a cameo portrait, even if it was a silhouette on the wall rather than a brooch that you wore, it was a way of sort of having somebody close to you. But this particular work that you've got up here is, would you like to just talk us through it? Because I think it's the process that Octavia uses in her work and the way in which she deals with the image and the repeated image and the evolution of images that is so sophisticated.
Well, I suppose Octavia really set herself on an iconographic adventure, you'd say. I mean, it's highly imaginative, her work, and the founders, I suppose, of her company, in a sense, are herself with her ponytailed silhouette. And she took, sort of in the form of a marriage portrait, she took Captain Cook James Cook as a sort of spokesmodel for the company. He had a ponytail too, so that appealed to her. And this work dates from, I think, 2009, and she, at that point, invented a series that she referred to as head transplants. Now, all the works in the series have Octavia's profile, but she appends to it the headgear and hairstyle of various royal and other personages, including actually Captain Cook. So she turns herself into Captain O. Cook at that point. But in order for her to do this, she sort of invented the stretch limousine of cameos, which is a sort of crazy 4-part creation, and it's called Death of the Ponytail. And so she sort of she shed her headgear, and then she began to don others. So there's a lovely one where it's based on it's called Her Her Imperial Highness, and she's based on Pharaoh of Iran with the most fabulous bouffant circa 1968 or something like that. So, yeah.
So there's a lot of parody and there's a lot of punning, but also underlying it, there's a very serious look at what are the effects that time have on us. You know, that you've got it particularly in this work here. And this is a Yvonne Todd photograph, which I find absolutely stunning. And I'd like you to talk us through this, because that moves the cameo from the breast or the chest to the ear.
Yeah.
And worn as a pair, but they're particularly effective in this work. Do you want to just...
Well, this work that Octavia's wearing in this portrait by Yvonne is called A Fine Pair, and it shows Octavia on one side and HRHQE2 on the other side. So yeah, that's the fine pair. And I suppose Octavia's been very interested in the relationship between photography and jewellery. She curated at one stage with Warwick Freeman a very interesting exhibition for Object Space, which was all about jewels and photographs and photographic jewels. But she herself has collaborated with a number of people, and Yvonne seemed the most fabulous collaborator for Octavia. They had this shared sense of humour, and when I first saw this photo that Yvonne came up with. I said to Octavia, it looks like your tail is on fire. And I mean, trust Yvonne to put her in this, you know, sort of, she's sort of smoking from behind. Yeah.
Slightly gothic.
Yeah.
But tell me about the materials, because, you know, historically cameos were made from stone, they were carved, or they had ivory added to them. So talk us through Octavia's use of materials.
Well, she sort of she made the cameo sort of her signature by about 2002. Prior to that, she'd actually made jewels that were based all on her grandmother's jewels, and they were called Better Than the Real Thing. And she literally photocopied, blew up on the photocopier, and then laminated her grandmother's jewels. So that, and she sometimes set them in precious metal. She's very interested in, I suppose, every aspect of jewellery, particularly settings. But I guess it comes about because Octavia is interested in, I suppose, the study of preciousness, you could say. And, you know, as opposed to a previous generation of local jewellers, you know, associated with bone stone shell, who made use, I suppose, of material that was very local and locally sourced, but also very natural. I mean, I always think when I look at bone stone shell jewellery, it looks like the sort of jewellery that you could go tramping in. You know, I mean, that's a terrible thing to say, but Octavia was not interested in making the sort of jewellery that you would go tramping in. She was much more interested in a much more glamorous kind of idea, but she also had a sort of critique of preciousness in there. So these are made of plastic and sterling silver.
But it's the skill with which she does it, the skill that she has in making them. The backs of them, as you've shown in that one that just was on the screen a minute, this one, the backs of each work are as important as the front, it seems to me. They're so beautifully finished and thought through.
Well, I guess for Octavia, jewellery is really persuasive because it's a very social art. And she likes the fact that, you know, you don't wear your paintings when you go out, but you do tend to wear your jewels. And she likes to make them audacious scale, and she likes people to talk about them. And at the same time, she's very interested in the subliminal side of jewellery and the fact that jewellery is a carrier of very personal messages. And I think that's fascinating. And this is some very new work by Octavia that she's making for the Dunedin Public Art Gallery for next year. And she had a commission, and she's making a kind of homage, in a sense, to an aspect of 19th century jewellery she's very keen on. In the 19th century, there was some tradition of regard jewellery, which many of you probably know a lot more than I know about. But what occurred in this was that messages were spelled out in gemstones. Messages like regard, which you would sort of think if you were going to spell out a message in gems, you could come up with something a little bit more high temperature. But but anyway, that was the idea. So this is a locket with the rubies, emeralds, garnets, amethysts, rubies and diamonds, which is a code for regard. So Octavia is interpreting this in her own way. Having moved on from the cameos, she got very interested in ideas about camouflage, duplicitous surfaces, and also she's obsessed, I suppose, with the way in which jewellery and adornment of human beings often refers to the animal kingdom. So in this case, what she's going to do is she's going to spell out the word shallow, which refers to her great current interest in veneers. It probably also refers somewhat to the way in which people typically regard jewellery as maybe not as important as painting or other arts, full stop. And clearly she believes that jewellery is a superlative art, which I agree.
Well, what I was thinking about your gallery and the history of your the shows that you've had, and in a way you will laugh, but you remind me of Lorenzo de Medici, because
Thank you. Sounds good.
Lorenzo de Medici was more interested in what they call the arte minori, which doesn't mean minor arts, it means small arts. And artists and craftspeople from all over Europe were commissioned to make exquisite objects for him. He liked them better than paintings. And if you go to the Pitti Palace, of course, you can see some of those objects there. And I think, you know, that's the thing. Sometimes we might think, oh, well, it's just a piece of jewelry, but it has as much resonance, and it has, these works have as much meaning as any painting or print or sculpture.
Yeah, but yeah, I mean, it's always occupied me that it's a lot harder for people that work in this way to get themselves established.
Yes.
I'm always trying to persuade people to buy a museum quality teapot over a you know, a fairly modest painting by someone with modest experience. So yeah, it is. Yeah, I think it's very interesting. And that man who was the curator for Dane Mitchell's Venice Biennale project, Chris Sharp, he wrote a very interesting article which is called Theory of the Minor. And,
right.
Yeah, and I guess it's a rebuttal of the minor. And I think this is it's a very worthwhile and interesting sort of series of questions to ask. And I also think the applied arts and the decorative arts, or perhaps appliedness in general, is something that is a very intriguing form at different times in history. I mean, you look at what was happening at the time of industrialization and how you had the arts and crafts movement arise. And I think you always, at times of absolute crisis, you get a really interesting shift. I mean, the Russian constructivists are another, you know, fantastic example, aren't they? And
well, that whole focus
at the sort of crazy time. And
you think of the Amiga workshop in London, with the Bloomsbury group, and this desire to decorate as well as to paint, to build as well as to sculpt, to embroider, to paint on all different surfaces. It was a real breaking down of those different traditions, but also a way of incorporating them. And that goes all the way through to an artist like Tracy Emin with her embroideries on blankets. You know, it's sort of, they go in and out of fashion, don't they, at different times. And there was definitely a period in the 20th century where artists wanted to consider what they thought was fine art as being superior to something that is handmade. And yet, of course, most art is handmade. Yes. Not all, but most is.
Yes, that's right. I guess one of the things that really attracted me to Octavia's work, aside from, you know, the obvious, I mean, it's fantastically humorous and imaginative.
She has a terrific sense of humour.
Yes, and it's fastidiously made. I mean, that they really are, like, they are very beguiling objects.
Yes, they are. They are.
In your hand, and if you own one, you know, you know how absolutely thoughtful and beautifully constructed they are. And well, that's a fascinating quality. You know, it does actually change the object, and it sticks with the object. And I think,
well, they're like a piece of punamu. You have to touch them.
Yes, that's
right. You know, they have that wonderful surface. Yeah. Yes.
But it's, to me, it's that the way that making and thinking are sort of connected. It comes together in her. She'd never make the sort of imaginative flights of fancy she does if she didn't spend long hours at the workbench.
Yes. So we might have to move forward because we've got quite a lot to get through. But should we
this is a funny example. I mean, I mean, one of the things about Octavia's practice that's distinctive is that she is someone who makes commissions. And that's been fascinating. And she said to me one day, I'm not a very good collaborator, meaning that she didn't think that she'd made great work when she'd been asked to work with other artists. And I said, well, what about your commissions? Because she has made some absolutely crazy things for people, and they are much enjoyed. This ring, for instance, was made for a Wellington couple for a 40th wedding anniversary. And the recipient, the wife, liked it so much that she wore it constantly, and one of the heads fell off of the swans that are supposed to mate for life. So it was immediately returned to Octavia, and she had to give it a head transplant. So what did she do? She gave it a golden head, rather a real gold, 18 carat rather than plastic, and she gave it a lovely sparkling champagne diamond eye, which was so appropriate because the husband had, he really did have a sparkling eye, yeah, so it was good. It was most appropriate. So we move on to the...
So now we're going to talk about Johanna Pegler, and I've always been fascinated with her work, and particularly this series that you've included in this PowerPoint here, because I've associated some of her work with a much wider palette, but she's moved into this very powerful muted palette.
Yes.
And reading about her work today, the way in which she sort of focuses on the overlooked, the landscape that is not as magnificent as sort of the grand Chevalier paintings, the sort of things that people focused on historically to do with landscape. But she makes you look at them extremely closely. The more you look, the more you see.
I think her work is probably, you'd say, subject to fire. And, you know, it actually, it might look like a hillside, but I don't think it really, you know, it's far richer than that. I mean, she's really, I suppose, a very tender kind of a painter, but a terrific observer. And this is an unusual painting for her because I think it was the first one that was pretty much monochrome, and it was made in, I think, 2014. It's called Vicarious Visit. And strangely, it's an oddity in Johanna's oeuvre because she really has painted the places she is most, that are most familiar to her. And having finished her degree at Elam in 1987, she went and lived in the Coromandel, right at the northeastern tip, Waikowal Bay, and she lived there for 15 years in a house with no electricity. And she certainly made her own fun. I was thinking about her a lot over lockdown because she does epitomise for me the creativity of staying at home and being resourceful, but, you know, just actually, she's an armchair traveller, I think. You know,
yes.
She's someone that she stays at home, but she goes a long way. And this is a funny painting because it acquires its palette, I think, because it's a bit of a nod to sepia photographs, because she actually had an ancestor who settled on St. Helena. Now,
yes.
All her painting basically has been either the environment of the Coromandel. There's an occasional painting she's made in the very south of Otago, but now she lives in Wanganui, and she makes the most extraordinary paintings there. But this kind of corduroy feeling hillside has been denuded by goats, and I think it reminds her of, you know, the sort of unprepossessing details of the New Zealand landscape that she paints. She did a painting once of a scene that was related to the Parapara Road near Wanganui, and it was called Ladders. And I was like, why on earth is this painting called Ladders? And she said to me, oh, Anna, it's like, the hillside's like a silk stocking. Of course, Jo, of course. And, I mean, she's got this great way of thinking about things. One of the first paintings of her garden that I had, I should go to the garden painting. So see, here's another sort of just falling to bits in front of you, amazing cliff with all sorts of things going on in it. You know,
and this is sort of fantastic because you've got the birds, right? You know, this is so quintessentially, well, not just New Zealand, but any sort of wild landscape where you've got the birds sort of using the thermals and rising up the side of the hill and taking off. But you've also got this rather almost spooky foreground.
Yes, yes.
And is it just meant to be a shale bed on the edge of the river, or does it have any other significance?
I think no. Look, I think it's a crumbling cliff on the west coast, out from Wanganui, probably Kaiwi Beach way, and that's what it's sort of based on. But you know, it's like a sort of sleeping beast, isn't it?
Yes, and the other thing is, you know, I mean, compared to some countries, the wilderness in New Zealand is often quite monochromatic. There isn't a great range of colours in the landscape unless something happens to be flowering. It's only when you look at it closely that you realise there's about 50 tones of brown.
Yeah.
You know, and she's actually captured that diversity within a single monochromatic range.
Well, one of the things about her is I think she's a texturalist. You know, she's got an absolute, her paintings have a musical sort of rhythm. They have amazing vibrations. She must be one of, you know, the most economical painters. She doesn't put a lot on, but they have a glow because of the way that she underpaints. And she uses all these tiny little brush strokes, they're like, you know, these flying kind of amazing sort of, they emblematize the way in which I suppose small things make a great difference. I often think her paintings must take a lot of walking, where she must walk back and forth in the studio thinking, you know, should I just a tiny little bit more here? And sometimes it's amazing how subtle something is in a very big painting. Like this is a really good sized painting. But yeah, small things make a big difference to it.
And it's that thing of you giving the painting time and you're getting close enough, because the closer you get to it, you sort of dissolve into the textures of the surface itself, as you do with a lot of paintings, of course.
Yeah, no, they really reward looking, and they are very, you know, they're absolutely fantastic. I mean, their imaginative properties are great. I mean, possibly they're totally different aesthetically from Octavia's work, but they have a very distinctive way of looking at the world.
That element of attention, I think, is what does link them together.
Yeah, that's right.
Do you want to bring up
Oh, well, this is a lovely one. This is from the series. She made a great show, an exhibition, I think 2 years ago, called Canopy Cornucopia, and all the paintings were based on her garden, front and back garden in Wanganui, a very imperfect paradise, you know, quite a dishevelled garden that she has taken enormous artistic license with from time to time. And this painting is called Artichoke because it's you would know the name of the plant that you get all those little green sort of fruits off that she's piled up on the chair.
It's hard to make it out on my screen, but what I love about it is there's something quite surreal about this painting. I've looked at, because the plants have a complete life of their own, but that sort of snaking branch, which could even be a tail, you know, and then you've got the mundanity of the electricity wires going off on one side.
Yes, yeah, absolutely, yeah.
She sort of brings your attention to the everyday, and to do it so cleverly with such a narrow range of colour is quite fantastic.
Yeah, and you also notice that sort of range in brushstroke, don't you? Like going from the tiny flicker to the quite sort of scruffy, and that sort of very sort of dry brush, scrubby. You know, just she's a delightful painter. She really has made a way of working totally her own.
But she makes the garden slightly uncanny.
Yes, definitely.
You know, there's something about that chair. I'm not entirely sure I want to go and sit down the end of that garden.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I mean, who would paint, you know, a sort of, you know, this is kind of, it's a bit of a wreck, isn't it? The bit of vegetation beside the chair. It's
yes.
Yes, that's just typical of her. I mean, this is the Ko-Fi in her back garden, and it's featured in a number of paintings, as has the. I think I thought that this was the rusty corrugated iron fence, but actually I think it's a neighbour's roof.
It looks like a roof, but there's something very lyrical about the movement in this. It's like a tree that's dancing almost.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's for her quite. Well, this one's got quite a lot of paint on for Johanna Pegler.
Who does she look to?
Really interesting that you say that. Look, I think she has always had a great fondness for some of the, I suppose, colonial American folk painters, for instance, have been, and also, you know, the sort of English folk painting tradition. People like Alfred Sharp, she has a huge appreciation for. She's also made all sorts of paintings. Did I put another one? No. She's made paintings that portray a kind of sensitivity to all sorts of different moments in painting. Like, I suppose, there are Italian 15th century painters that she actually would look to and be really interested in. There was an image of her back garden that she painted where she put right dead centre in the composition a seagull, a black-backed gull, and it kind of occupied the place that you would find like the dove in, you know, Piero della Francesca. I mean, it sort of seems crazy to make an analogy between that, but she loves that very genuine, tender feeling of those early paintings.
Well, you know, when you look at some of those early frescoes in Florence or in Assisi with Giotto, say, for example, and they're done in fresco on a wall, but when you get close, which soaks it, and of course the fresco soaks into the wall, but when you get close to them, you realize what tiny brushes that they used, and that in fact you're looking at a myriad number of brush strokes rather than a single tonal surface. It's only when you step back from it that you actually read it as a single color. And you know, her works remind me of that, but of course, so they're also like the pasture of Wyeth. You know, you say about America, you know, that sort of attention to this, the individual brushstroke, that every blade of grass is important in its own right.
Yes, yes, yeah.
It's making you really think about those particular details.
Yeah, she's just an amazing observer, I think. I mean, I sometimes think it's a sort of gentle environmental poetry that she makes. I mean, it's always a bit paradoxical. I mean, she did a big painting once that was called Careless Days, and I think it sort of was a bit of a joke on carless days from the 1970s. But what it was the sort of flotsam and jetsam on the Wanganui River. And so it was a river painting, and she just loved I mean, there was lots of just detritus, but it was sort of the way it was organised in this sort of casual way that she found incredibly aesthetically pleasing. But she was actually giving her wonderful attentiveness to something that was totally unprepossessing, something that was really quite rubbishy. But you know, so it's not a straightforward. I mean, she doesn't. You know, she's not a sort of a. It's not a bumper sticker art. You know, it's not.
She also, in a funny kind of way, reminds me of Hockney's later paintings, the landscapes he's been doing over the last few years, which when I first saw them, it took me a lot of getting used to, because I'd been so used to his vibrant colors and the sort of American boldness of his work. And then he goes back to England and falls in love with the softer landscape, and his brushwork changes accordingly. So you know, for me anyway, I can see a real kind of synergy between his work and these later paintings of Johanna's.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, she uses a lot less paint than him. You know, they do have this wonderful sort of, you know, almost chalky kind of, quite fresco-like character when you're up close to them.
Yeah, but some of his latest works that he's been doing are also quite limited as far as palette is concerned, and he focuses much more on the individual brushstroke. So it's just.
I totally love his early stuff, though. I'm sorry, I don't really want. I haven't quite got my head around those ones, Mary. I love his early work. I mean, it's his graphic ability.
I know, but when you
extraordinary. I mean, one of my no.
But I watched a film of him walking through the Yorkshire landscape, and he looks at the landscape and talks about the landscape in a way that a young person can't do. It's an old man with all his creative experience looking at the land and getting satisfaction from the land. And, you know, they're not perhaps as great paintings as some of his early ones, but they're very important to what he's experiencing and observing in the landscape now.
Yeah, although I think that they're probably more landscape paintings in a way than her paintings.
They are. Yeah.
I think that's really the thing that people maybe. It takes a while to creep up on you with Johanna Pegler, but if you live with one, you know that they're much about that.
But you know, all good paintings take time.
Of course, yeah.
Yes.
Should we move on to the next?
So now we're going to talk about Vita, a very, very, a great colorist.
She's a colorist,
absolutely known for his color. So let's start first of all by you telling us a little bit about these bags.
Yeah, right. Well, I mean, I'm actually, this week I'm showing Vita's work at the Melbourne Art Fair, which is quite fun. I'm subjecting them to her rag rugs, so I'll show you some of those later. But she is really known for making beautiful, amazing, embroidered accessories and chiefly bags. She's very interested in the bag, and she has a great interest in modernism. I mean, Vita studied art history. She didn't go to art school, and so she is someone who's, you know, has a real interest in the history of painting, actually. And she was very inspired, I think, by Sonia Delaunay's work, for instance. And actually one of these bags, the one on the far right, is called Varvara. So that's after one of the Russian constructivist women, the great textile designer, Varvara Stepanova, I think is her name. But yes, she started making these incredibly amazing bags. They're made of Belgian linen, so it's painter's linen and beautiful New Zealand wool. And yeah, she explores her just fascination with pattern making and so on. I kind of wish that Vita would get some fabulous great commission. Like, I think we don't give the right people public commissions, in my estimation. That sounds very bossy, doesn't it? But yeah, that's one of my opinions. And I would like to see some people that have more of a background in the crafts receive some opportunities to work on huge scale. And I think I'm a great fan of someone like Edward Burle Marx, the fabulous Brazilian modernist who did the pavement along Copacabana Beach. And it's like, you know, we've got someone like that here. We have Vita, and she is amazing. And really, she should be doing some major paving projects, and that would really pep up a place in a major way. So this is to introduce you to a rug that she's made recently, and she's started making these rag rugs, which are they bring to life, she says, rugs represented in modernist paintings. Now, some of these modernist paintings are by people extremely well known, like Henri Matisse, and some of them are by people that you might hardly have heard of. Well, I certainly hadn't, like Marie Robieff, who is
I had never heard of her.
Who came to Paris in the sort of teens of the 20th century at the same time as Sonia Delaunay, and was known as Marevna. And so Vita has, she's sort of, there's all sorts of interesting things at play in these works. She seems to be revising our ideas of modernist painting in some ways. I mean, she does seem to be attending to the way that the innovations of someone like Matisse are unthinkable, or Vuillard, or perhaps Bonnard. They're not possible without being utterly steeped in domestic life. And in particular, Matisse, I suppose, exemplifies that fascination with pattern
his
making.
love of pattern and colour.
Textiles, yeah, and the applied. So this is Vita's gorgeous rug, and she's got one of the green pantalon off the knee of the odalisque has wound up there, but her leg has got left behind. But there is another one in the series which is called Modern Bohemia, and it's based on a Kirchner painting, and it's actually got a foot stretched out over the rug. So the rugs always bring to the floor what was connected with them in the painting. And I suppose she's made one other Matisse rug, which was simply called Henri, and it was this fabulous yellow, kind of a schematic sort of drawing of what a rug is. And it was from the Pink Studio, and it brought the perspective of the painting with it. So it was this really unbelievable shape.
But all of these artists that she bases this series on, both the well-known ones and the lesser-known ones, were living it. I mean, with modernism, this notion of the decorative and the fine art gets broken down completely. And what I was thinking about this particular rug today is when we look at a Matisse painting of an odalisque, we tend to look first and foremost at the person. But for Matisse, actually, the background, the floor, the curtains, you think of Bonnard, you look at that there. I mean, it could be a Frances Hodgkins, her obsession with pattern as well. It's making you look at design, it's making you look at pattern almost as an abstraction. And then the way they're all placed together, it's really, really rich. And, when you look at that particular painting, the rug in a funny kind of way is better painted than her pantaloons. When you look at the brush strokes on her raised knee, he's really sort of abstracted those brush strokes, but he wanted to capture the pattern. and you really get that attention with the floor itself.
Yeah, yeah, no.
Well, he was a great collector of fabrics, wasn't he? That wonderful show in New York of the materials that were used as backdrops in his paintings.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Another one of the rugs that Vita has done is it's based on a painting by who is it? But it's basically, it's a Cooper cloth. It's one of those. It's based on one of those cloths that African that Matisse collected lots of, and there were lots in that collection show. Yeah, so. Oh, this is it here. Now I wonder if I can. Who is it? It's the yellow rug there is called The Abandoned Doll. And it's Suzanne Valadon made the painting. It's actually a very sort of tender painting. It's a painting of a mother tending her sort of, I suppose sort of 12 or 13-year-old daughter who's just got out of the bath, and this rug is on the floor in front of them with a doll on it. And I suppose it's a painting that's really dealing with transition and this young girl growing up, and it's a very beautifully observed painting. And Vita's made this brilliant rug out of it. And it's funny, I mean, when she had the show with me, this picture is actually from the show she had in Melbourne in March this year. I went to the opening, and it was open for one day before the poor gallery had to close because of COVID. So I'm getting to present these rugs at the Melbourne Fair. Vita had envisaged making me a whole new series for June, but she's been let off the hook. But it's quite good because she'll probably be doing lots and lots of new research. I think the possibilities are really quite interesting for her, because it could, she could do a lot of excavation of modernism and find some really interesting
absolutely
modernists, and she could do some really sort of quite sort of category defying art historical work, I reckon, and it would be fun. Yeah, but they just are, I suppose their materiality is incredibly winning. They're kind of photographs don't do them justice.
No, but she's got a great sense of wit as well, because she calls each of the rugs by the first name of the artist, not by their famous surnames, which I think is a really clever thing to do as well. And it's like she's saying, seek me out, look, you find which painting this refers to. I find it absolutely fascinating.
She makes you really look hard at painting.
Exactly. And I think all of your artists, all art, you cannot just assume that you can understand it immediately. The best art actually challenges you to keep going back and keep looking, and that's when you find the sort of richness in a work. Do you want to just talk about the last image, which is the sampler?
Oh, yeah, well, yeah, Vita hadn't made samplers before, although she's such an embroiderer and has been using stitching for a long time. Maybe before I talk about that, I should say, her first job after she graduated with her art history master's degree from Auckland University was to make a huge rag rug. She was commissioned to make one for Lord of the Rings. And she said it took her months, and it was on screen for all of 2 seconds as a very hairy foot of Bilbo Baggins trod on it or something. But the tradition of sampler making is really obviously fascinating. And Vita happened to one day be going on a big long train ride, which she rather likes, from I think Sydney to Melbourne, and she hadn't got a project with her. So she started making this. She sort of involuntarily started making a sampler, and she realized, she could make a modern sampler. She could play around with all her sort of fascination with geometry. So she ended up making an exhibition called Samplers that I showed in 2017. And this is one of the works. And I suppose this one, she's given it this hilarious name from some textile book that she spotted at my house, which was Pattern, a historical panorama. And I suppose, sometimes samplers were about, engaging young women in busy work to keep them from getting into other mischief. Probably sometimes they were, about showing off your accomplishments and your skills. Sometimes they're about, learning some jolly good tricks like a darning sampler or a sampler, which is just that you simply rehearse lots of the same stitch so you get really good at it. This one is really the sort of the embroiderer having quite a lot of fun, taking a lot of license, and sort of showing off some of her favourite stitches. And
but also taking elements from modernist paintings and reworking them herself. And there's quite a political history to the sampler, isn't there? I mean, often women hid messages in which were protest messages about their constraints on their lives. And there's a lovely quote in an essay I read about Vita, which says that she uses the armor of our foremothers. That notion of the sampler as a political statement, because often they referred, if you go back to the 17th century, there are samplers that refer to Cromwell and that refer to Charles II, and you could, it was a way of women having a voice within a medium which was considered to be demure and proper. So I think that's something that's always appealed to me about them. But also it's her perspective. It's the same in the rugs. She doesn't just she doesn't look at Matisse's rug from the perspective that he used. And each of them, it's like making you look at the design, the pattern, the what she's focused on, and working out why she's done it from that particular point of view. So it's very, very complex when you actually sit down and look at it. And when I looked at this work, I was thinking of Arisa's embroideries. It's that we had in the 19 gallery, as part of the Hodgkin show at the gallery. And, embroidery in many different cultures has many different roles. And I think that that's something that's really re-emerging in Western art in a very, very strong way. Like you think of that beautiful Annie Albers show that finally they had at the Tate, and Tracy Emin's use of embroidery as a political statement. There's a lot going on.
Yeah, and I think it's quite it's sort of like the last taboo, isn't it? I mean, it's easy for people to think that things that are as decorative as a sampler like this are not very cerebral, but I think there's a vast amount going on, and I'm really attracted to the work of Vita and others who I show, because they have got such huge knowledge of the traditions and respect for and devotion to. I mean, they're all fastidious makers, and
they're rule breakers.
Yeah.
They look at the historical rules about embroidery, or they turn them on their heads. Now I realise we've sort of flown through, and I think we're running out of time, Anna. But Penny, does anyone want to ask a question?
Yes, we have a couple of people actually. Trish Gribben would like to ask a question.
Hi, Anna.
Hi, Trish.
Fabulous listening to all this in lockdown, even if it wasn't lockdown. Could you tell me, what are the materials Vita uses in her rugs, and what is the scale?
That rug is, let's see, I'll just
roughly even.
It's nearly it's about 1.5 meters long, and probably about sort of 70 centimeters, 73 I think, wide, and it's about 5 centimeters deep. It's very plush. It's made from wool, which comes from blankets and garments that she collects up, or is given, or it collects from op shops, sort of a 20k radius from her house in Sydney. So she gets on the train sometimes with a big empty suitcase, and she likes the shops where you can buy it by weight. So it's active recycling, and it's very interesting because sometimes she uses very thick wool. She cuts that into very thin strips, like a sort of fettuccine. But if she gets a very fine kind of merino, she'll cut that into great big pappardelle sort of fat strips. So that makes for a very interesting textural life to these things when you get up close to them. Yeah.
Wow. Thank you.
And I don't know if you can see, but it looks like Hamish Koenig has one of her bags there, which you can see the scale from Hamish's image that he's holding up. Thank you, Hamish.
Oh, nice. So a geometric bag, yes. Yeah.
And Sue Gardner has also got a question.
Hi, Anna. I guess what interests me about the rugs that Vita makes is the intersection between the tradition of rugs and the tradition of paintings. Yes. And paintings, we expect to find them on the wall, and rugs we expect to find them on the floor. But now paintings are coming off the wall and often ending up on the floor. I wondered whether Vita's rugs come off the floor and end up on the wall.
Well, not if she has anything to do with it. She is a stickler for things being used. She thinks that they get better with age. She likes to, she's very happy if you buy one of her bags to repair it endlessly for you. And she likes things to have a good life. And she believes that the rugs get better with wear. That's why she only uses wool, she says, because it does felt down really nicely as opposed to synthetics and cotton. But I suppose it's interesting, isn't it? Yeah. Octavia is very committed to jewellery being worn because that's sort of like the sort of performance that goes on is of interest to her. And just like the sort of secret message on the back for the owner is aware of is of great interest to her too.
In a way, it's equally disruptive, isn't it, to the tradition? If you actually keep it in its own location, but you're disrupting the notion of the rug, what its intention is, what its context, and how it's been conceived by reference, in Vita's case, by referencing paintings, but keeping them as rugs, not making them as paintings.
Well, I think Vita perhaps reminds us that there was a time when rugs were far more, and textiles were far more esteemed than paintings. Like,
that's right.
It's only if you couldn't afford the tapestries to hang in your castle that you would bother having a painting.
Yeah, because the tapestries were the walls.
That's a whole fact, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, it's interesting where objects migrate around, isn't it, between wall and floor. Thanks, Anna.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's good.
So there's no further questions. So if that's it for those, and we'd probably just like to say thank you very much to Anna, particularly for joining us this evening and for all the preparation that you've done to talk with us. And Mary, also thank you. Everyone else for joining us. Next week we have Sue Gardner talking with Jenny Todd from Two Rooms, and Hamish Koenig is going to be also coming into that talk to talk about some photographs of Mark Adams as well. So hope you can all join us. Thank you so much and see you next week.
Thank you.
Night, everyone.
Good night. Thanks very much. Bye.